The December wind cut through North Carolina like a blade as I pulled my Honda Civic into the Fort Bragg family housing complex. After 18 months deployed to classified locations I couldn't name, even the familiar sight of these identical military houses felt foreign. But what made my stomach clench wasn't the cold, it was the silence from my phone. No welcome home texts, no dinner invitations, nothing. My name is Major Sarah Chen, and I'm 34 years old. For 12 years, I've served my country as an intelligence analyst, though my family has never quite understood what that means. To them, I'm the disappointment who chose computers over combat, analysis over action, the black sheep who abandoned the family tradition of real military service. The Chen family compound sprawled across 3 adjacent houses on Normandy Drive. 4 generations of warriors had called this place home. My great-grandfather's service medals from World War II occupied the place of honor in the main house's living room. My grandfather's Purple Heart from Vietnam hung in the hallway. My father's Bronze Star from Desert Storm gleamed beside it. My brother Mike's Combat Infantry Badge from Afghanistan held the newest position, flanked by his deployment patches. My certificates and commendations, they were classified, invisible, non-existent in my family's eyes. I parked outside my small efficiency apartment, standard military housing for single officers, and checked my phone again. The family group chat had been buzzing all morning with Christmas dinner plans, menu discussions about prime rib and my grandmother's famous dumplings, seating arrangements that apparently required military precision. My name appeared nowhere in the conversation. The text that finally came at 1:15 p.m. wasn't what I'd hoped for. Mike Chen, big brother. Family dinner starts at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Officers only. You understand. I stared at those 3 words until they blurred. You understand. Translation: your desk job doesn't qualify you for our warriors' table. Your service doesn't count. I'd spent the last year and a half in Syria, Afghanistan, and places that don't officially exist on any map, analyzing terrorist communications that prevented 3 major attacks on American soil. I'd missed birthdays, holidays, and relationships to serve in shadows deeper than any foxhole. I'd saved more American lives than anyone in my family would ever know. But I pushed papers. I wasn't a real soldier. The suffocating irony was that while my family saw failure, I held the highest security clearance at Fort Bragg. While they saw a desk job, I'd briefed 4-star generals who shaped national defense policy. While they planned their exclusive dinner, I was one of only 12 officers in the entire army trusted with the nation's deepest secrets. None of that mattered. In the Chen family military hierarchy, I was a disappointment wrapped in ACUs. I climbed the stairs to my sterile apartment, each step echoing in the empty stairwell. Through my kitchen window, I could see directly into the main house, where my mother was already setting the formal dining table with our grandmother's china. 23 place settings for 23 family members, 24 people in our military family, 23 chairs. The math of my worthlessness was precise and brutal. As darkness fell over Fort Bragg, I made myself a cup of instant coffee and opened my laptop. Even on Christmas Eve, threats didn't pause for holiday celebrations. Somewhere in the world, enemies of America were planning attacks, and it was my job to stop them while my family feasted without me. My phone buzzed with another family group message. This time, it was a photo of everyone gathered in the main house living room, their dress uniforms creating a sea of ribbons and medals. 23 faces smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Real soldiers, real family. Merry Christmas to those who serve with honor." I wasn't in the picture. That's when I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. The familiar ache of exclusion was crystallizing into something harder, colder, something that felt like the exact moment when hurt transforms into resolve. I had spent my entire career protecting people who didn't even acknowledge my service existed. Tomorrow, I would watch through my window as my family celebrated Christmas without me, never knowing that the failure upstairs had prevented a Christmas Day bombing that would have killed thousands. But as I stared at that family photo, at all those proud faces that looked so much like mine but felt like strangers, one thought kept echoing in my mind. They had no idea who they were really excluding from their table. And somehow, deep in my bones, I had the feeling they were about to find out. The sound of laughter drifted through my thin apartment walls as I microwaved a lean cuisine for one. Through my window, the main house glowed with warmth, every light blazing, cars packed in the driveway, the front door opening and closing as relatives arrived in their dress blues and service uniforms. I'd grown up believing the Chen family was military royalty. 4 generations of distinguished service stretched back to my great-grandfather, who'd stormed the beaches of Normandy with the 82nd Airborne. His Congressional Medal of Honor sat in a place of reverence above the fireplace, surrounded by a constellation of lesser but still impressive decorations. The family legend was carved in bronze and blood. My grandfather, Sergeant Major William Chen, had earned his Purple Heart dragging wounded soldiers to safety during the Tet Offensive. The family still told stories about how he'd refused evacuation until every man in his squad was accounted for. "Real soldiers don't leave anyone behind," he'd always said. My father, Colonel James Chen, had commanded an artillery battery during Desert Storm, earning his Bronze Star for precision strikes that saved an entire infantry division. His war stories were dinner table gospel, each one ending with the same moral: victory belongs to those who face the enemy head-on. Then there was Mike, my older brother by 3 years, the golden child who'd followed the family blueprint to perfection. 2 tours in Afghanistan as an infantry officer, a combat infantry badge, and enough combat decorations to make our father weep with pride. At family gatherings, he was the heir apparent to the Chen military dynasty. And then there was me. The anomaly, the disappointment, the one who'd broken a century-old tradition by choosing intelligence work over infantry, analysis over artillery, computers over combat. I remembered the exact moment our relationship shifted. I was 22, fresh out of West Point, sitting in the same main house while the family debated my branch assignment. Every Chen had chosen a combat arms specialty. It was written in our DNA, encoded in our family honor. Intelligence, my father had said, the word dripping with distaste. Sarah, warriors lead from the front. They don't hide behind computer screens. My mother had been even more direct. Intelligence work isn't real military service, honey. It's administrative, like being a very expensive secretary. Mike had laughed, that casual cruelty that only siblings can deliver with surgical precision. "Come on, Dad. Let her have her desk job. Someone has to file the paperwork while real soldiers do the fighting." That laugh had echoed in my head for 12 years. Now, as I watched through my window, I could see them all gathered around that same dining room table. The family patriarch, my father, holding court at the head. My mother, elegant in her navy dress, serving her famous Christmas ham. Mike, resplendent in his dress blues, regaling everyone with stories from his latest deployment. 23 family members, 3 generations of warriors, sharing war stories and comparing medals like precious family heirlooms. I counted the uniforms through the window. Army dress blues, Marine dress blues, Air Force service dress, Navy whites. Combat infantry badges, airborne wings, ranger tabs, special forces patches. The visual representation of everything the Chen family valued. Courage under fire, leadership in battle, service on the front lines. My intelligence badges and analyst certifications weren't displayed anywhere in that house. My top secret/PSI clearance didn't rate wall space. My commendations for preventing terrorist attacks were classified, invisible, non-existent in the family narrative. I was the family ghost, present but unseen, serving but unacknowledged. My phone buzzed with a message from my cousin David, an Army Ranger. David Chen, wish you were here, cuz. Mom asked where you were. Uncle James said you were probably working. We all laughed. What kind of work do intelligence people do on Christmas Eve? Must be nice having such an easy job. I stared at that message until the words blurred together. An easy job. While they sat around that table sharing stories and passing down military traditions, I was monitoring communications chatter about a potential holiday attack. While they celebrated, I was analyzing threat assessments that could save American lives. But my work was invisible. My sacrifices were classified. My service was questioned by the very people I'd sworn to protect. Through the window, I watched my father stand to propose a toast. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the ritual, glasses raised, heads nodded in solemn agreement, the sacred bond of warriors acknowledging warriors. I raised my water glass to the empty room and whispered my own toast. To the soldiers who fight in shadows, whose names never appear in headlines, whose families never understand their war. Outside, snow began to fall, coating the Chen family compound in pristine white. Inside the main house, my family continued their celebration, completely unaware that their greatest protector was sitting alone, 100 yards away, watching them through frosted glass. As I finished my microwaved dinner, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. Tomorrow would be different. Somehow, someway, the invisible daughter was about to become impossible to ignore. I just didn't know how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. I woke to the sound of car doors slamming and excited voices carrying across the frost-covered compound. Through my bedroom window, I watched as more relatives arrived for the traditional Christmas morning brunch, another Chen family ritual I'd forgotten I wasn't invited to. My phone had been silent all night. No Merry Christmas texts, no last-minute invitations, nothing. I made coffee and checked the family group chat, hoping maybe someone had remembered I existed. Instead, I found a flurry of messages about gift exchanges, seating arrangements, and who was bringing what dish. My name appeared exactly 0 times in 47 messages. At 9:30 a.m., my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door. She was a sweet elderly woman whose husband had served in Korea, and she'd always treated me with the kind of maternal warmth my own mother reserved for my brother. "Sarah, honey," she said, holding a plate of homemade cookies. "I was just wondering, aren't you joining your family this morning? I saw all the cars and I was surprised you weren't over there." The question hit me like a physical blow. Even the neighbors expected me to be included in my own family's celebrations. I'm not feeling well," I lied, forcing a smile. "Probably better if I rest." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with concern and something else, a knowing sadness that suggested she understood exactly what was happening. "Well, if you need anything, dear, anything at all, you just knock on my door." After she left, I found myself standing at my kitchen window again, watching the festivities I'd been deliberately excluded from. The main house buzzed with activity. I could see my cousin's children running around in their Christmas pajamas, my aunts bustling between the kitchen and dining room, my uncles gathered around the television watching football. At 11 a.m., I witnessed something that broke the last piece of my heart. My mother emerged from the house with a professional photographer in tow. The entire family began gathering on the front lawn for what was clearly a planned photo shoot. 23 people arranged themselves in perfect military formation, active duty members in the front row wearing their dress uniforms, retired veterans in the second row, spouses and children filling in behind them. It was the official Chen family Christmas portrait, and every single person was accounted for. Except me. I watched from my window as the photographer snapped dozens of shots, capturing every possible combination of our military dynasty. 4 generations of service members, their medals glinting in the winter sunlight, their faces radiant with pride and belonging. When my father called out instructions for different groupings, active duty only, combat veterans, officers, I found myself automatically checking which categories I qualified for, every single one. Yet I remained invisible, watching through glass like a ghost haunting her own family. The photographer packed up his equipment, and everyone headed back inside for Christmas dinner. The smell of roast turkey and my grandmother's famous stuffing wafted across the compound, making my empty apartment feel even more hollow. At 2 p.m., I received a single text message that would haunt me for years. "Mom, just wanted you to know we took some beautiful family photos today. Everyone looked so handsome in their uniforms. Too bad you weren't feeling well enough to join us. Maybe next year you'll be available, as if my absence had been my choice. As if I hadn't been deliberately excluded from my own family's most important traditions. I spent Christmas Day alone with a frozen turkey dinner and Netflix reruns, listening to the sounds of celebration echoing from the house where I'd grown up. Every burst of laughter felt like another small wound, every toast another reminder of my unworthiness. As evening fell and the last relatives finally departed, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my laptop and began typing a transfer request, a formal application to move my assignment from Fort Bragg to anywhere else in the world, anywhere my family's disappointment couldn't follow me. But as I stared at the blank form, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I'd never seen before with a Washington, D.C. area code. Major Chen. The voice was crisp, professional, urgent. "This is the White House Situation Room. We have a developing situation that requires your immediate expertise. How quickly can you be available?" I looked out my window at the Chen family compound, now quiet and dark, the site of my ultimate rejection. "I'm available now," I said. I had no idea that this phone call would transform me from the family disappointment into the one person they'd never be able to ignore again. The invisible daughter was about to step into the light in ways none of us could have imagined. As I hung up from that mysterious Washington call, my mind raced back to all the moments my family had dismissed my service as not real military work. If only they knew the wars I'd been fighting in shadows they couldn't imagine. The truth was, for the past 12 years, I hadn't been pushing papers. I'd been preventing catastrophes. My first real deployment wasn't to some forward operating base with sandbags and mortars. It was to a windowless bunker in Syria, where I spent 8 months intercepting ISIS communications. While my family assumed I was filing reports, I was translating death threats and tracking bomb makers through encrypted chat rooms. Operation Desert Shield wasn't in any history books, but it should have been. 3 separate terrorist cells had coordinated an attack on 6 major American cities during 4th of July weekend. The plan was sophisticated: simultaneous bombings at parades, fireworks displays, and family gatherings that would have killed an estimated 10,000 Americans. I stopped it with 72 hours to spare. My computer work involved identifying a single word pattern in thousands of intercepted messages. A seemingly innocent phrase about celebrating independence that appeared in communications from different continents. While other analysts dismissed it as coincidental patriotic language, I recognized it as a coordination code. I spent 36 straight hours mapping connections, tracing funding sources, and building a web of evidence that led FBI teams to 3 bomb factories and 17 terrorists. The raids happened at 4 a.m. on July 3rd. By July 4th, millions of Americans celebrated their freedom, never knowing how close they'd come to losing it. My reward was a classified commendation that couldn't be displayed, couldn't be discussed, couldn't be acknowledged. My family never knew their daughter had saved thousands of lives that weekend. They just knew I'd missed another family barbecue for work. Then there was North Korea. For 6 months, I'd been tracking unusual satellite communications between Pyongyang and a network of seemingly unconnected businesses across Southeast Asia. The pattern was subtle. Financial transfers that appeared legitimate, shipping manifests that looked routine, but when analyzed together, revealed something terrifying. North Korea was building a nuclear weapons supply chain through civilian cover companies. They were 3 weeks away from acquiring weapons-grade plutonium when my analysis reached the Pentagon. The intelligence I provided led to sanctions that crippled their operation and prevented nuclear materials from reaching terrorist organizations across the Middle East. The operation was so classified that even the president's daily briefing only referred to it as diplomatic pressure successfully applied. My family read about the sanctions in the newspaper and probably assumed it was just typical Washington politics. They had no idea their daughter had prevented nuclear terrorism. But perhaps the mission that haunted me most was Afghanistan. While Mike was earning his combat infantry badge leading patrols in Kandahar, I was 300 miles away in a classified facility, monitoring Taliban communications about his battalion. For 4 months, I knew things about my brother's deployment that he didn't know himself. I tracked the movements of every insurgent cell in his operational area. I identified IED placement patterns that would have killed his entire unit. I intercepted communications about ambushes planned specifically for his patrol routes. Night after night, I sat in that bunker providing real-time intelligence updates that kept my brother alive, while he had no idea his despised sister was his guardian angel. The night that changed everything was October 15th, 2019. Taliban communications revealed a complex ambush designed to target American convoys during a routine supply run. Mike's battalion was scheduled to provide security escort. I had 2 choices: follow protocol and submit my intelligence through official channels, which would take hours to process, or break every rule and make direct contact with field commanders. I chose to break the rules. At 2:30 a.m., I used emergency communication channels to contact Mike's commanding officer directly. "This is Major Chen, 525th Intelligence Squadron. Cancel all convoy operations in Grid Square 42, MD 847,293. Immediate threat detected." The convoy was rerouted. The ambush failed. 17 American soldiers, including my brother, went home alive instead of in flag-draped coffins. Mike never knew. His unit assumed the route change was standard operational security. He came home telling stories about boring escort missions and complaining about unnecessary tactical adjustments. Meanwhile, I received a formal reprimand for violating communication protocols, even though my actions had saved an entire platoon. That was my reality, saving lives in secret, taking risks my family couldn't comprehend, fighting wars they'd never acknowledge. As I sat in my apartment on Christmas night, staring at my silent phone, I realized something profound. While my family celebrated their visible wars, their public medals, their recognized service, I'd been fighting the most important battles of all, the invisible ones that prevented wars from happening in the first place. The Washington call had interrupted my isolation, but it had also reminded me of who I really was. Not the family disappointment, not the failed soldier. I was the guardian they never knew they needed, but being that guardian had cost me everything my family took for granted. While they celebrated holidays together, shared stories, and built relationships, I'd been sacrificing pieces of my soul in windowless rooms thousands of miles away. The price of protecting America wasn't just missing Christmas dinners. It was missing life itself. I thought about Rebecca, the woman I'd planned to marry 3 years ago. She was a nurse at Walter Reed, someone who understood military life, or so I thought. We'd been together for 2 years when I received orders for a classified deployment to Eastern Europe. "How long will you be gone?" she'd asked. "I can't tell you. Where are you going?" "I can't tell you. What will you be doing?" "I can't tell you." The conversation that ended our relationship lasted less than 5 minutes. "Sarah, I love you, but I can't live with a ghost. I can't marry someone who disappears for months without explanation, who can't share what consumes 90% of their life." She was right. How do you explain that you're spending 6 months in a bunker in Poland, monitoring Russian troop movements that could prevent World War III? How do you tell someone you love that you can't call them for weeks because your voice might compromise an operation that could save millions of lives? You can't. So you choose duty over love, mission over marriage, national security over personal happiness. That deployment in Poland was where I learned what real sacrifice meant. While Mike was earning praise for his combat leadership, I was spending 18-hour days analyzing intercepted communications about Russian plans to invade 3 NATO countries. The intelligence I gathered prevented an invasion that would have triggered Article 5 and potentially started a nuclear war. For 6 months, I lived on 4 hours of sleep and MREs, watching computer screens until my eyes bled, knowing that one missed detail could mean millions of dead civilians. I came home to an empty apartment and a Dear John letter from Rebecca. My family never asked about the deployment. They just assumed I'd been working on computers somewhere safe. Then there was my daughter. Not biologically mine, but Emma might as well have been. She was the 8-year-old daughter of Captain Maria Santos, my closest friend in the intelligence community. Maria had been killed in a car accident in Germany, leaving Emma with no family except a godmother who'd sworn to protect her. I'd been in the middle of a crisis in Syria when I got the call about Maria's death. Emma was alone in a German hospital, asking for the woman she called Aunt Sarah. I had 2 choices: abandon a mission that was preventing chemical weapons from reaching ISIS, or fly to Germany to comfort a grieving child. I chose the mission. ISIS never got those weapons. Thousands of Syrian civilians lived because of intelligence I provided that night. But Emma spent 3 days alone in that hospital, waiting for someone who never came. By the time I reached Germany, she'd been placed in foster care. She looked at me with eyes that held a pain no 8-year-old should understand. "You promised you'd always be there when I needed you," she whispered. I had no answer that would heal that wound. How do you tell a child that her safety mattered less than strangers on another continent? How do you explain that love sometimes means choosing the greater good over the people you die for? Emma was adopted by a wonderful family in Colorado. I get a Christmas card every year with photos of a girl who looks increasingly like her mother. This year's card showed a beautiful teenager getting ready for prom, surrounded by adoptive parents who'd given her the stability I never could. She was better off without me, but knowing that didn't make the sacrifice hurt any less. These were the costs my family never saw. While they criticized my desk job, I'd been giving up everything that made life worth living. Marriage, relationships, the chance to be a mother figure to a child who needed me, all sacrificed on the altar of national security. My apartment was a monument to that sacrifice. No photos of friends, because friendships required explanations I couldn't give. No romantic mementos, because love required presents I couldn't promise. No pets, because even a dog needed more consistency than my life allowed. The only decorations were my classified commendations, hidden in a locked drawer because displaying them would violate security protocols. Awards for saving lives that no one could know about, for preventing disasters that would never make headlines, for fighting wars that couldn't be acknowledged. As I sat in my sterile apartment on Christmas night, surrounded by the echoes of my family's celebration, I realized something that changed everything. I'd been so focused on protecting others that I'd forgotten to protect myself. I'd been so committed to being invisible that I'd erased my own existence. But that Washington phone call had reminded me of something crucial. Invisible didn't mean powerless. My family was about to learn the difference between the two in ways that would shake their understanding of what real service looked like. The Guardian was tired of being ignored. That resolve crystallized into something harder when my phone buzzed with a message that would become the last straw in 12 years of accumulated indignities. Mike Chen, big brother. Hope you had a good Christmas, sis. Mom wanted me to reach out. We're planning New Year's Eve party at the main house. Big celebration, 3 generations of real warriors sharing war stories. You understand why it's family military only, right? Nothing personal. Maybe you can join us for regular family stuff sometime. I read that message 3 times, each reading making my hands shake with a different emotion. First confusion, then hurt, then a white-hot rage that surprised me with its intensity. Real warriors sharing war stories. Nothing personal. Regular family stuff. I was being categorized as regular family stuff, not military enough for the warrior's table, not civilian enough to be taken seriously, existing in some gray area of family hierarchy where I was tolerated but never truly accepted. The New Year's Eve party would be the ultimate Chen family military celebration. Mike had been planning it for months, a formal gathering where everyone would wear their dress uniforms, display their medals, and share combat stories. It was designed to be a living monument to our family's military legacy. And I wasn't invited. I walked to my window and looked across at the main house, now dark except for the porch light. Tomorrow, they'd start planning another celebration that would pointedly exclude the one person among them who held the highest security clearance, who had prevented more enemy attacks than all of them combined, who had sacrificed more for this country than they could imagine. My phone buzzed again. Cousin David, can't wait for Mike's party. Finally a chance for real soldiers to share real stories without having to explain military stuff to civilians. No offense, Sarah, just nice to have warrior time, you know. No offense, just nice to have warrior time. I was being excluded from warrior time by people who had no idea I'd been fighting wars they couldn't comprehend while they slept safely in their beds. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, every relationship I'd destroyed, every piece of my soul I'd surrendered to keep America safe. I thought about Emma, alone in that German hospital. I thought about Rebecca, walking away because I couldn't explain why my mission mattered more than our wedding plans. I thought about every sleepless night, every missed holiday, every moment of my life I'd given to serve people who saw my service as administrative work. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like the sound of something expensive finally cracking under too much pressure. I opened my laptop and pulled up the military personnel transfer request form I'd started earlier. For years, I'd considered requesting assignment anywhere else in the world, anywhere my family's disappointment couldn't follow me. Afghanistan, Syria, Eastern Europe, anywhere intelligence officers were needed and appreciated. But as I sat there in my empty apartment, staring at that transfer form, I realized I was done running from their ignorance. I was done apologizing for my service. I was done being invisible. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of a transfer request, I began typing an email to my commanding officer, Colonel Martinez. The subject line was simple: request for emergency leave, personal family matter. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to transfer to another base where I could serve in anonymous competence. I was going to do something I'd never done in my entire military career. I was going to make myself impossible to ignore. The plan forming in my mind was audacious, probably career-ending, and absolutely necessary. For 12 years, I'd protected my family's safety while they questioned my worth. For 12 years, I'd fought their wars while they dismissed my service. It was time they learned exactly who they'd been excluding from their warriors' table. My phone rang again, another call from that same Washington, D.C. number. This time, I answered on the first ring. Major Chen, the voice said, crisp with urgency. We have a developing situation. How quickly can you be in Washington? I looked around my sterile apartment, then across at the main house where my family slept peacefully, completely unaware that their safety depended on people like me. I can be there tonight, I said. What I didn't tell the voice on the phone was that I was about to bring Washington to them. The invisible daughter was about to become the most visible person in the Chen family's military history. And they had no idea what was coming. The call that would change everything came while Fort Bragg still slept under a blanket of Christmas snow. I'd been awake all night, staring at the ceiling and replaying Mike's message about real warriors, when my secure phone erupted with the distinctive ring reserved for national emergencies. Major Chen, this is Director Harrison, National Security Council. The voice was clipped, urgent, carrying the weight of someone who'd been awake for 36 hours straight. We have a developing situation in the Taiwan Strait. Chinese naval forces began mobilizing at 2 a.m. Beijing time. Intelligence suggests this isn't a drill. I sat up in bed, my mind instantly shifting from personal grievances to professional focus. What's the intelligence assessment, sir? That's why I'm calling you. Your analysis of Chinese military communications patterns is the most comprehensive we have. The president needs a threat assessment briefing, and you're the only analyst who's been tracking their naval coordination protocols for the past 2 years. Through my window, I could see the Chen family compound bathed in the soft glow of Christmas morning peace. My family slept soundly, completely unaware that on the other side of the world, events were unfolding that could reshape the global balance of power. How quickly can you be at Andrews Air Force Base? Director Harrison continued. 2 hours, sir. Make it 90 minutes. We're sending a car. Pack for at least 72 hours in Washington. And Major. His voice dropped. This is compartmentalized at the highest levels. No communication with anyone about this situation until further notice. The line went dead. I moved with practiced efficiency, packing my dress uniform alongside civilian clothes and the encrypted laptop that contained 2 years of analysis on Chinese military movements. As I gathered my classified materials, the irony wasn't lost on me. while my family questioned whether intelligence work was real military service. I was being summoned to brief the President of the United States on a potential war. At 6:45 a.m., a black sedan with government plates pulled up outside my apartment. The driver was a young Air Force sergeant who checked my identification with the thoroughness of someone handling nuclear launch codes. "Major Chen, I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. We have priority clearance to Andrews." The jets fueled and waiting. As we drove through the sleeping neighborhoods of Fort Bragg, past houses where military families dreamed of peace, I thought about the crisis brewing 8,000 miles away. For months, I'd been tracking unusual patterns in Chinese military communications, subtle changes in coordination protocols, new frequency allocations for naval operations, encrypted messages with timing patterns that suggested operational planning rather than routine exercises. Most analysts had dismissed these patterns as standard military modernization. But I'd seen something else, the digital signature of a nation preparing for something unprecedented. The Chinese weren't just conducting exercises, they were rehearsing an invasion. My analysis had been sitting in classified databases for weeks, flagged as potential concern, but not elevated to crisis status. Now, as Chinese warships moved toward Taiwan in formations I'd been tracking since October, those patterns were about to become the most important intelligence briefing of my career. At Andrews Air Force Base, I was escorted directly to a waiting C-37A Gulfstream, the military version of the executive transport used for high-priority personnel. The cabin was configured as a mobile command center with secure communication equipment and classified workstations. "Major Chen," a woman in navy dress blues approached as I boarded. "Commander Lisa Park, Pacific Fleet Intelligence. I'll be your liaison during the briefing preparation. We have a 40-minute flight to review your assessment files." As the jet lifted off from Andrews, carrying me toward the most important briefing of my life, my phone buzzed with a text message from the family group chat. "Mom, Boxing Day brunch at 10 a.m. Family-only military members welcome, of course. Sarah, you probably have to work anyway, right?" I looked out the window at the landscape rushing past below millions of Americans starting their normal day, completely unaware that their safety might depend on intelligence analysis conducted by someone their own family considered a fake soldier. Commander Park spread classified documents across the cabin table. "Your analysis predicted this exact scenario, Major. Naval formations moving in the patterns you identified, communication protocols matching your behavioral models. The Joint Chiefs want to understand how you saw this coming when no one else did." I thought about my family's New Year's Eve party, where real warriors would share war stories while dismissing intelligence work as administrative duty. I thought about Mike's combat infantry badge and my father's Bronze Star, displayed with pride, while my classified commendations stayed hidden in locked drawers. They had no idea that the desk job they mocked was about to become the most critical military intelligence briefing since the Cuban Missile Crisis. As our jet descended toward Washington, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. While my family had been excluding me from their warriors' table, I'd been preparing to sit at the most important table in the world. The invisible daughter was about to brief the president. The Pentagon at dawn was a fortress of controlled chaos. As our jet touched down at Andrews, I could see unusual activity even from the air, additional security perimeters, extra vehicles, the telltale signs of a building operating in crisis mode. Commander Park escorted me through expedited security checkpoints. "The Joint Chiefs have been in session since 4 a.m. She briefed me, as we walked through corridors filled with officers moving with purposeful urgency. Your analysis has been distributed to the National Security Council. We entered the Pentagon's National Military Command Center, a windowless chamber where America's highest military decisions were made. Multiple screens displayed real-time satellite feeds of the Taiwan Strait, where Chinese naval formations moved in patterns I'd been tracking for months. Major Chen, a tall man in Air Force dress blues, approached. General Patterson, Joint Chiefs, your intelligence assessment has become our primary source. Walk us through what you're seeing. For the next hour, I stood before America's most powerful military leaders, explaining patterns that had taken me 2 years to identify. The Chinese naval movements weren't random exercises, they were following precise coordination protocols, suggesting operational planning for amphibious assault. The timing indicators show they're not just practicing, I explained, pointing to data streams. They're synchronizing for something specific. Based on optimal conditions for amphibious operations, I estimate they have a window between December 28th and January 2nd. General Patterson leaned forward. You're saying they could invade Taiwan in the next week? Sir, this could be precursor to invasion or designed to gauge our response commitment. The room fell silent. A direct Chinese assault on Taiwan would trigger defense treaties that could lead to World War III. At 9:30 a.m., an aide whispered something to General Patterson that made his face go pale. Major Chen, he said, standing. The President wants to see your analysis personally. Air Force One is being prepared. You'll be briefing POTUS directly. The words hit me like a physical blow. In 12 years of service, I'd never briefed the President. The invisible intelligence analyst was about to sit across from the most powerful person in the world. As of right now, you're temporarily assigned to the National Security Council under presidential directive. Patterson continued. My family. At that moment, they were gathering for Boxing Day brunch, setting places for 23 people, discussing Mike's New Year's Eve party for real warriors. They had no idea their disappointing daughter was about to become the most important person in American national security. At 10:45 a.m., I found myself aboard Air Force One. The President's Airborne Command Center was more sophisticated than any military installation I'd ever seen. Secure communications to every major command, real-time intelligence feeds, crisis management capabilities that could run a war from 30,000 feet. Major Chen, a woman in a sharp business suit, approached. I'm National Security Advisor Morrison. The President is reviewing your files now. My secure phone buzzed with a family group message. Dad, Sarah's not at brunch again, probably sleeping in after her easy Christmas. Some of us had to work yesterday. Real military families don't get holidays off. The irony was suffocating. While they criticized my absence, I was flying toward the most critical national security briefing in decades. While they questioned my service, I was about to advise the President on preventing World War III. At 11:20 a.m., an aide approached. Major Chen, the President will see you now. As I walked toward the presidential cabin, straightening my dress blue uniform, one thought echoed in my mind. Mike's New Year's Eve party was for real warriors sharing real stories. But by then, if my analysis was correct, I would have just prevented the biggest war story any of them could imagine. The invisible daughter was about to step into the room where history was made. The meeting with the President lasted 47 minutes and changed the trajectory of my entire life. President Harrison was nothing like I'd expected from television appearances. In person, he radiated an intensity that filled the cabin, his questions sharp and probing, his understanding of geopolitical implications frighteningly sophisticated. When I spread my analysis across his conference table, showing him the communication patterns that predicted Chinese intentions, he listened with the focus of a man who understood that every decision could reshape the world. "Major Chen," he said after reviewing my projections, "if your assessment is correct, we have less than 72 hours to prevent a conflict that could spiral into global war. I need you on-site for real-time analysis. Where would give you the best operational oversight?" "Sir, ideally somewhere with direct satellite communication access and proximity to Pacific Fleet intelligence feeds." He turned to National Security Advisor Morrison. "Get me options for secure facilities within 2 hours of Fort Bragg. I want Major Chen positioned where she can monitor developments and provide immediate assessment updates." Morrison consulted her tablet. "Sir, Fort Bragg itself has a classified intelligence facility that could be upgraded to presidential-level security within 6 hours. It would also allow Major Chen to maintain her current assignment cover." The president nodded. "Make it happen. I want Air Force One on the ground at Pope Field by 3 p.m. for an on-site secure briefing facility setup." My heart stopped. Pope Field was the Air Force base adjacent to Fort Bragg, less than 2 miles from my family's compound. "Sir," I said carefully, "my family lives on Fort Bragg. This might create complications." President Harrison looked at me with something that might have been amusement. "Major, you just provided intelligence analysis that could prevent World War III. Your family complications are about to become very, very small problems." At 2:15 p.m., I found myself back aboard Air Force One as it descended toward North Carolina. Through the aircraft windows, I could see Fort Bragg spread out below the base where I'd grown up, where my family still questioned my military service, where Mike was probably planning his New Year's Eve celebration for real warriors. The irony was so profound it felt surreal. In less than an hour, Air Force One would land at Pope Field, bringing the President of the United States to the backyard of a family that had spent Christmas excluding me from their military gatherings. "Major Chen," Morrison approached as we prepared for landing. "The president wants you to understand something. Your analysis didn't just predict Chinese movements, it provided the strategic framework that allowed us to position naval assets to deter aggression without triggering conflict. You may have just prevented a war." As Air Force One touched down at Pope Field, I could see the organized chaos of a presidential arrival. Security perimeters were expanding across the base, Marine helicopters circled overhead, and a convoy of armored vehicles waited on the tarmac. The entire base was shifting into the heightened security posture that accompanied presidential visits. More importantly, I could see the crowds gathering along the base perimeter. Word of Air Force One's arrival had spread quickly through the Fort Bragg community. Military families, personnel, and civilians pressed against security barriers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the presidential aircraft. Among those crowds I knew would be my family. At 3:45 p.m., as President Harrison disembarked Air Force One to inspect the temporary command facility being established in a classified building adjacent to Pope Field, my secure phone exploded with messages from the family group chat. "Mike Chen, big brother, holy shit, Air Force One just landed at Pope Field. POTUS is at Fort Bragg. Anyone know what's going on? Dad, unprecedented security lockdown. They're setting up some kind of command center. Must be a major national security situation. Cousin David, I'm at the perimeter fence with about 200 other people. Marines everywhere. This is bigger than anything I've ever seen. Mom, I wonder if Sarah knows what's happening. She works in intelligence, maybe she has inside information for once. I stared at that last message, thinking about the cosmic irony. They were wondering if I had inside information, while I was literally walking 20 feet behind the President of the United States. At 4:30 p.m., the temporary secure facility was operational. President Harrison convened what would later be classified as one of the most critical national security briefings in modern history. The room contained the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the National Security Advisor, and me, a major whose own family considered her military service questionable. "Major Chen," the president said, "I need real-time analysis of any changes in Chinese positioning or communication patterns. The next 24 hours will determine whether we're looking at diplomatic resolution or military conflict." Through the facility's windows, I could see the crowds still gathered along the security perimeter. Somewhere in those crowds were 23 members of the Chen family, trying to understand why their quiet military base had suddenly become the center of global attention. They had no idea that the answer was sitting in a classified briefing room, wearing Major's oak leaves and providing intelligence assessments that could prevent World War III. At 5:20 p.m., an aide approached President Harrison with an urgent message. After reading it, he looked directly at me. "Major Chen, Chinese naval forces have begun changing formation patterns. I need your immediate assessment of whether this represents escalation or de-escalation." As I analyzed the new intelligence data, my hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment, I realized something that would have been impossible to imagine 48 hours earlier. While my family planned their New Year's Eve party to celebrate real warriors, I was sitting in a room where the real war, the one that would never happen because we prevented it, was being fought with intelligence, diplomacy, and the kind of strategic thinking they'd never recognized as military service. Mike's party would celebrate past wars and past heroes. I was preventing the next one. The invisible daughter had become the most visible person in American national security, and my family was about to discover that the biggest story of their military legacy was happening right under their noses. The moment that would shatter my family's understanding of military service came without warning, broadcast live on every major news network while they sat around their dinner table. I was in the secure facility, analyzing the latest Chinese naval positioning data, when President Harrison made an impromptu decision that would change everything. After successfully de-escalating the Taiwan crisis through diplomatic channels informed by my intelligence assessments, he decided the American people deserved to understand how close they'd come to war and who had prevented it. "Major Chen," he said, approaching my workstation, "I'm going to make a brief statement to the press about today's diplomatic success. I want you beside me." My blood ran cold. "Sir, my family doesn't know about my involvement in this situation." "Major, your family is about to learn exactly what real military service looks like." At 8 p.m., President Harrison stepped before a hastily assembled press pool outside the Pope Field Command facility. The backdrop was Air Force One, gleaming under floodlights, with Fort Bragg's familiar buildings visible in the distance. "My fellow Americans," the president began, his voice carrying across the base and into millions of homes via live television. "Today, we faced a potential military crisis that could have drawn our nation into conflict. Thanks to exceptional intelligence work by one of our finest officers, that crisis has been resolved through diplomatic channels. In the Chen family compound, 2 miles away, 23 people stopped eating their leftover Christmas dinner to watch their commander-in-chief address the nation from their own backyard. The intelligence analysis that prevented this conflict came from Major Sarah Chen of the United States Army. President Harrison continued, gesturing for me to step forward. Major Chen's 2 years of meticulous work tracking communication patterns and military movements provided the strategic framework that allowed us to position our response precisely and avoid military confrontation. I stepped into the lights, wearing my dress blue uniform, my oak leaves reflecting the camera flashes. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the collective gasp from crowds gathered along the base perimeter. Major Chen, a reporter called out, "Can you tell us about your role in today's events? For the past 2 years, I've been analyzing patterns in foreign military communications that suggested potential aggressive actions," I said, my voice steady despite knowing my family was watching. The intelligence community's job is to see threats before they become conflicts, to prevent wars rather than just fight them. President Harrison stepped forward again. "I want the American people to understand something crucial. The most important military victories are the ones that never make headlines, the wars that never happen because of officers like Major Chen who fight battles in shadows to keep our nation safe." At 8:15 p.m., as the press conference concluded, my secure phone exploded with notifications. The family group chat was in complete chaos. "Mike Chen, big brother, what the fuck? Sarah was just on TV with the president. Sarah. Our Sarah. Dad, that's our Sarah, standing with POTUS, in dress blues with oak leaves. Cousin David, I'm literally watching this from the fence line. I can see Sarah on stage with the President of the United States. Mom, I don't understand. How is our Sarah? How did she? She works on computers. Uncle Robert, she just said she's been preventing wars for 2 years. She's been preventing wars. Aunt Marie, we excluded her from Christmas dinner. We excluded her from Christmas dinner." The messages came faster than I could read them. A digital avalanche of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. 23 family members were simultaneously discovering that the person they dismissed as not real military had just been publicly thanked by the president for preventing World War III. At 8:45 p.m., as I was debriefing with the National Security Council about next steps, an aide approached with a message that made me smile for the first time in days. "Major Chen, there are approximately 50 people at the main security gate requesting to see you. They're claiming to be your family." Through the facility's windows, I could see them gathered at the checkpoint, my parents, Mike, aunts, uncles, cousins, all still wearing their Christmas dinner clothes, all carrying expressions of stunned disbelief. They'd driven from their compound to the security perimeter, probably still trying to process what they'd witnessed on live television. President Harrison, overhearing the aide's message, approached with something that looked like genuine amusement. "Major Chen, I believe your family complications just became significantly more complex." At 9:20 p.m., after receiving presidential authorization, I walked through the security checkpoint to face the Chen family gathering. 23 people who had spent 2 days excluding me from their military celebrations now stood in awkward silence, staring at the daughter, sister, and cousin they'd never understood. Mike was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, the president just said you prevented a war." I looked at all of them, my father with his bronze star, my brother with his combat infantry badge, my cousins with their deployment patches, and realized that none of their medals represented preventing anything close to what I'd just accomplished. "Mike," I said quietly, "I've been preventing wars for 12 years. You just never asked what I actually do." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of Air Force One's engines powering down and the quiet conversations of security personnel. My mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, we didn't know, we thought. You thought intelligence work wasn't real military service, I finished. You thought I pushed papers while real soldiers fought wars. As I stood there in my dress blues, with Air Force One behind me and my family's shocked faces before me, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. The invisible daughter had finally stepped into the light, and nothing would ever be the same. The conversation that followed would reshape the Chen family forever. We moved to a nearby visitors center that had been cleared by security, creating a bubble of privacy within the chaos of the presidential visit. 23 family members sat in stunned silence while I remained standing, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. My father was the first to break the silence, his voice cracking with emotion I'd never heard before. Sarah, we had no idea. 12 years and we never asked what you actually did. You never wanted to know, I replied, my tone steady but not unkind. Every time I tried to explain, you dismissed it as administrative work, computer stuff, not real military service. Mike stepped forward, his face pale with realization. That night in Afghanistan, when our convoy route got changed at the last minute that saved our lives, That was me, I said quietly. I monitored Taliban communications about your unit for 4 months. I probably knew more about threats to your battalion than you did. The weight of that revelation settled over the room like a physical presence. My brother, the combat veteran, the family's golden warrior, had been protected by the sister he'd mocked for having a desk job. Mom approached with tears streaming down her face. Sarah, honey, we're so sorry. We thought. We believed. You believed what you wanted to believe, I said. That combat arms were the only real military service. That intelligence work was somehow less important than carrying a rifle. But why didn't you tell us? My father asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Tell you what? That my work was classified. That I couldn't discuss saving American lives because it might compromise ongoing operations. You made it clear that anything I couldn't explain in detail wasn't worth acknowledging. The room fell silent again. I could see the dawning understanding in their faces, the realization that their dismissal hadn't just been hurtful. It had been fundamentally wrong about the nature of military service itself. Uncle Robert, a Vietnam veteran, spoke next. Sarah, that medal ceremony we saw on TV last month, when they honored intelligence officers for counterterrorism work. I was there, I said, receiving a classified commendation for preventing 3 separate terrorist attacks. But the ceremony wasn't publicized, and I couldn't tell anyone what the award was for. We never knew, my aunt whispered. You never asked. President Harrison's words from the press conference echoed in the silence. The most important military victories are the ones that never make headlines. Mike looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, respect mixed with something that might have been awe. Sarah, I owe you an apology that I'll probably spend the rest of my life trying to make up for. We all do, my father said, his voice heavy with regret. Sarah, can you forgive us? I looked at these 23 people who shared my blood, my name, my military heritage. For 12 years, they'd made me feel like an outsider in my own family. But standing there in my dress blues, fresh from briefing the president, I realized something profound. Their ignorance about my service didn't diminish what I'd accomplished. Their dismissal didn't erase the lives I'd saved. Their exclusion didn't make me less of a warrior. I forgive you, I said, but I need you to understand something. This family has spent generations celebrating wars that were fought and won. I've spent my career preventing wars that never had to happen. Both are military service. Both matter. At 10:30 p.m., as we prepared to leave the visitor center, my mother made an announcement that surprised everyone. Next Christmas, she said, her voice firm with resolution, we're doing things differently. Sarah, I want you to plan our family celebration. I want to learn about the kind of service we never understood. As we walked back toward the security checkpoint, Mike fell into step beside me. Sarah, that New Year's Eve party I was planning for real warriors. What about it? I'm canceling it. Instead, I want to throw a party celebrating all kinds of military service, including yours, especially yours. Looking back at Air Force One, still gleaming under the floodlights, I realized that the invisible daughter had done more than step into the light. She had redefined what light meant for an entire family. 6 months later, I stood in the same Fort Bragg compound where this story began, but everything had changed. The Chen family Christmas celebration of 2025 bore no resemblance to the painful exclusion I'd endured the year before. Instead of 23 place settings that deliberately excluded me, our dining table now accommodated 24 chairs with mine positioned at the head, where the family's most honored member belonged. The wall of military honors had been completely redesigned. My classified commendations, finally declassified after congressional review, now held positions of prominence alongside my father's Bronze Star and Mike's Combat Infantry badge. But more importantly, the family had added a new section. Wars that never happened, featuring intelligence achievements, diplomatic successes, and conflict prevention operations by family members across generations. President Harrison had kept his promise to recognize invisible service. The Presidential Medal of Freedom I'd received in March was displayed in a place of honor, but it wasn't the centerpiece. That honor belonged to a simple photograph, me briefing the president aboard Air Force One, with a handwritten note from him that read, "To Major Chen, thank you for preventing the war we'll never have to fight." Mike's New Year's Eve party had indeed been transformed. Instead of real warriors sharing war stories, it became an annual celebration of all forms of military service. Intelligence officers, logistics specialists, communications experts, medical personnel, everyone who served in the shadows finally had their stories honored. "Sarah," my father said as we gathered for Christmas dinner, "would you say the blessing this year?" I looked around the table at faces that had once viewed me with disappointment, but now radiated genuine respect and understanding. My mother, who had once suggested I find civilian work, now volunteered at veteran support organizations specifically focused on intelligence community families. Mike, who had mocked my desk job, was pursuing additional education in strategic intelligence analysis. "I'm grateful," I began, "for a family that learned the difference between serving in the light and serving in the shadows. Both require courage. Both matter. Both deserve honor." After dinner, as relatives shared stories of their military service, my cousin David approached me with something I'd never heard before, a request for advice. "Sarah, my daughter wants to pursue intelligence work after West Point. Can you tell her what that really means?" I smiled, remembering the young woman I'd been 12 years ago, choosing a path my family couldn't understand. "Tell her it means fighting wars that no one will ever know about, preventing conflicts that will never make headlines, and protecting people who may never thank you for it. Tell her it's the most important work she'll never be able to talk about. And tell her," I added, "that invisible doesn't mean unimportant." As the evening wound down, I stepped outside onto the same porch where I'd once felt so alone. But tonight, Mike joined me, along with several cousins who wanted to hear about intelligence work, about preventing conflicts, about the wars that never happened because someone was watching in the shadows. At 10:30 p.m., my secure phone buzzed with a familiar tone, another crisis developing somewhere in the world, another situation requiring the kind of analysis that prevents wars rather than fights them. "Duty calls," Mike asked, recognizing the sound. "It always does," I replied. But now I know my family understands what that means. As I prepared to answer that call, to step back into the invisible world where I fought my silent wars, I realized something profound about legacy. It's not just about the medals on your chest or the stories you can tell. Sometimes the greatest legacy is the story that never gets told, the war that never happens, the lives that are saved without ever knowing they were in danger. The Chen family had learned to honor all kinds of service, the visible and the invisible, the celebrated and the classified, the wars that make history and the wars that prevent history from taking a darker turn. My name is Major Sarah Chen. I am 35 years old, and I serve my country in ways most people will never understand. But my family finally does. And that, more than any medal or commendation, is the victory that matters most. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible, unappreciated, or misunderstood for the way you serve others, know that your service matters, even when no one sees it. The most important battles are often fought by people whose names never appear in headlines. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please like this video and subscribe to honor Vindicated for more stories of unrecognized service and quiet heroism. Share your own story of invisible service in the comments, because every guardian deserves to be seen, even if they can't be named. Until next time, stay safe and remember, the best warriors are often the ones you never hear about.